Most people have never heard of the Book of Enoch, yet it was one of the most widely read religious texts in the early centuries of Christianity. In ancient times, it was quoted by church leaders and valued for its explanations of angels, judgment, and the origins of evil. But today, it is not part of the Bible used by most Christians. It was excluded from the Hebrew Scriptures and later dropped from most Christian canons. Only the Ethiopian Orthodox Church still includes it in its Bible. So what was in it? This book claims to record the words of Enoch, a figure briefly mentioned in Genesis. It does not tell typical stories of prophets or kings. Instead, it describes a group of heavenly beings called the Watchers who came to earth, broke divine laws, and taught humans knowledge that was not meant for them. According to the text, these teachings changed the world and led to the rise of giants, widespread corruption, and ultimately the flood that wiped out nearly all life. Scholars once considered the Book of Enoch a valuable historical document. Fragments were discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls, confirming its ancient Jewish origins. Early Christian writers, such as Jude, quoted from it. Yet, as the biblical canon took shape, it was set aside. The Book of Enoch opens with a message about judgment, but its most famous section begins in what scholars call the Book of the Watchers, written around the 3rd century BCE. This section tells a detailed story that expands on a very short and mysterious passage found in Genesis 6 verses 1 to 4. In Genesis, we read that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful and took them as wives. Their children became the mighty men of old. The passage is brief and leaves many questions unanswered. Who were these sons of God? Why did their actions matter? And how did this connect to the flood? The Book of Enoch gives its own answer. According to Enoch, the sons of God were angels known as the Watchers. The term comes from an Aramaic word meaning those who are awake or those who observe. Their role, as described in the text, was to watch over humanity. They were not meant to interfere with human life, but they did. The story says that 200 Watchers descended to earth during the days of Jared, a generation before Noah. Their leader is named Semjaza. Another key figure is Azazel. Before descending, they make a pact together on a mountain called Hermon. They agree that they will all share responsibility for what they are about to do. This moment is important. It shows intention. The text presents their descent not as a mistake, but as a deliberate decision. Once on earth, the Watchers take human women as wives. The language is direct. It does not describe symbolic unions. It presents real relationships that cross a boundary between heaven and earth. This union produces offspring described as giants. But the story does not stop there. The Watchers also begin teaching humanity knowledge that the text calls forbidden. Azazel teaches people how to make weapons, swords, and shields. He also teaches the use of metals and cosmetic practices. Other Watchers teach astrology, enchantments, root cutting, and knowledge of the movements of the sun and moon. In the worldview of the Book of Enoch, this knowledge was not neutral. It was power given too early and without moral restraint. The text connects this teaching directly to the increase of violence and corruption on earth. This is a major theme. The origin of evil is not explained as human weakness alone. It is described as the result of heavenly rebellion and the misuse of knowledge. Ancient Jewish readers would have understood this story in the context of their time. During the Second Temple period, many Jewish writings explored the idea that spiritual beings influenced events on earth. The Book of Enoch reflects that worldview clearly. The Watchers are not minor characters. They are central to the explanation of why the world became filled with violence before the flood. In Enoch's account, human sin is amplified by angelic instruction. This interpretation influenced early Jewish and Christian thought. Fragments of the Book of Enoch were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran, showing that the community there considered it important. The Epistle of Jude in the New Testament directly quotes from Enoch 1:9, which shows that early Christians were familiar with it. However, not all Jewish groups accepted this expanded story. Rabbinic Judaism eventually moved away from identifying the sons of God as angels. Many later interpretations describe them as human rulers or descendants of Seth. Over time, the angelic interpretation became less common in mainstream Jewish tradition. The early church also debated the issue. Some church fathers, such as Tertullian, accepted the Book of Enoch as valuable. Others questioned its authority because it was not part of the Hebrew canon. As the biblical canon developed, Enoch was excluded from most Christian Bibles, except in the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition, where it remains part of Scripture. Still, The Watchers did not disappear from theological discussion. The idea that rebellious angels influenced humanity shaped later concepts of fallen angels and demons. In the Book of Enoch, the consequences of the Watchers' actions are severe. God sends archangels to respond. Raphael is instructed to bind Azazel. Michael is sent to deal with Semjaza and the others. Gabriel is told to confront the giants. The Watchers are imprisoned in darkness until the day of final judgment. The text describes them being bound in valleys of the earth, awaiting punishment. Their request for forgiveness is rejected. Enoch himself acts as an intermediary, delivering their petition to God, but he returns with a message of judgment instead of mercy. This is a powerful scene. It shows that in this narrative, heavenly beings are accountable. Authority does not mean immunity. The Book of Enoch does not treat the giants as a side detail. In its narrative, they are the direct result of the Watchers' rebellion, and they become the central reason the world collapses into chaos. Genesis 6 briefly mentions the Nephilim. The text says they were on the earth in those days and describes them as mighty men of old. That is all the biblical passage gives us. It does not explain their size, their behavior, or their role in the corruption of the world. The Book of Enoch fills in those gaps. According to Enoch, when the Watchers took human wives, their children grew to enormous size. The text describes them as giants who consumed vast amounts of food. Eventually, the earth could no longer sustain them. When resources ran out, the giants turned against humanity. They began to devour animals, then people, and finally even one another. The description is dramatic, but its purpose is clear. The giants represent uncontrolled power. They are portrayed as physically overwhelming and morally unrestrained. Violence spreads across the earth, and bloodshed becomes normal. In this account, human wickedness is not only moral failure, it becomes social collapse. Order breaks down. Justice disappears. The earth itself is described as crying out because of the violence committed on it. This idea of the earth crying out is also found in Genesis. In the story of Cain and Abel, the blood of Abel cries out from the ground. The Book of Enoch builds on this concept and expands it. The corruption before the flood is not quiet or hidden. It is public, visible, and destructive. The giants are central to that destruction. It is important to understand that the Book of Enoch was written during the Second Temple period, when Jewish writers were deeply concerned about the presence of evil in the world. Foreign empires ruled over Israel. War, oppression, and injustice were part of daily life. Many texts from this period reflect a desire to explain why the world felt so broken. The giants in this context become more than just large beings. They symbolize the result of crossing boundaries set by God. Heaven and earth were meant to remain distinct. When that order was violated, the result was instability. Enoch also introduces a detail not found in Genesis. After the giants are destroyed, their spirits do not simply vanish. The text states that their spirits become evil spirits on the earth. These spirits oppress, attack, and corrupt humanity. This passage is often cited as one of the earliest Jewish explanations for the origin of demons. This is significant for understanding later Christian theology. By the time of the New Testament, belief in unclean spirits was widespread. The Book of Enoch offers one of the clearest early frameworks for how such spirits entered the world. But before that stage, the giants themselves must face judgment. In Enoch's narrative, God does not ignore what is happening. The archangel Gabriel is commanded to incite the giants against one another. They begin to fight and destroy themselves. Their violence turns inward. The very strength that made them powerful becomes the cause of their downfall. This detail reinforces a consistent theme. Rebellion carries its own consequences. The giants are not defeated by human armies. They collapse through internal conflict. At the same time, the Watchers are bound and imprisoned. With both the rebellious angels and their offspring removed, the text moves toward the flood. In Genesis, the flood is introduced in a few direct statements. God sees the human wickedness is great and decides to bring judgment. In the Book of Enoch, the flood becomes a final step in cleansing a world that has been corrupted at multiple levels. Heavenly rebellion led to unnatural unions. Those unions produced giants. The giants filled the earth with violence. The violence reached a point where judgment became unavoidable. It is also important to note that the Book of Enoch does not present the flood as random destruction. It frames it as restoration. The world had moved beyond its intended order. The flood resets that order. From a literary perspective, the giants serve another function. They heighten the seriousness of the Watcher's actions. If the story only described angels marrying human women, the consequences might seem limited. By introducing giants who destabilized the entire world, the text emphasizes how severe the boundary violation was. Modern readers often ask whether the giants should be understood literally or symbolically. Scholars debate this question. Some argue that ancient readers likely accepted the story at face value. Others suggest the giants function as mythic language used to describe powerful warriors or oppressive rulers. What is clear is that the Book of Enoch treats them as real within its narrative world. Their size, hunger, and violence are described in concrete terms. The text does not present them as metaphors. The story also connects directly to Noah. Enoch identifies Noah as part of the righteous line that remains faithful while the rest of humanity is corrupted. The flood, then, is not only destruction, it is preservation of a remnant. By the end of this section, the giants are gone. The Watchers are imprisoned, but the deeper issue remains. Knowledge was given that changed human society. Weapons, warfare, astrology, secret arts, and manipulation of nature did not disappear with the flood. The memory of that knowledge continued. And this leads us to the final and most controversial part of the Book of Enoch, because the text does not only blame rebellion, it warns about information that humanity may not have been ready to receive. The Book of Enoch does not only tell a story about angels and giants. Its deeper concern is knowledge, not ordinary learning, but knowledge that changes power structures, accelerates violence, and reshapes human society. In the narrative, the Watchers do more than cross a physical boundary. They transfer information. Azazel is described as teaching humanity how to forge weapons from metal. He shows them how to craft swords, knives, shields, and armor. In the world of the text, this is not presented as technological progress. It is presented as the beginning of organized violence. Other Watchers teach the use of precious metals and cosmetics. The text links this to vanity and moral decline. It also describes instruction in enchantments, astrology, root cutting, and the observation of celestial movements. Astronomy itself was not forbidden in ancient Judaism. In fact, the Hebrew Bible often celebrates the order of the heavens. What Enoch criticizes is the misuse of heavenly knowledge for control and manipulation. The message is consistent. Knowledge without wisdom becomes destructive. In the cultural setting of the Second Temple period, this theme would have been powerful. Jewish communities were interacting with Greek science, foreign philosophies, and new systems of thought. There was tension between preserving tradition and engaging with new knowledge. The Book of Enoch reflects that tension. It does not reject learning entirely. Instead, it warns about knowledge that is acquired outside divine boundaries. This is one reason the text attracted attention. It offered an explanation for why advanced skills and arts could lead to corruption. It connected moral decay not only to human weakness, but to the misuse of hidden instruction. Enoch himself plays an important role here. Unlike the Watchers, he receives knowledge with permission. He is taken on heavenly journeys. He sees visions of cosmic order, angelic hierarchies, and final judgment. But he does not seize this knowledge. It is revealed to him. That contrast matters. The Watchers take knowledge and distribute it on their own terms. Enoch receives knowledge as part of a divine plan and records it as a warning. This difference highlights the book's central claim: authority matters. As Jewish tradition developed, debates about authority became more structured. By the 1st century, communities were already distinguishing between texts considered sacred and those viewed as valuable but not authoritative. The Book of Enoch was widely read. Fragments found among the Dead Sea Scrolls show it was copied and preserved carefully. The Epistle of Jude in the New Testament directly quotes a prophecy from Enoch. Early Christian writers, such as Tertullian, defended its value. However, several factors worked against its inclusion in the biblical canon. First, the book was not preserved in Hebrew in later centuries. While it originally circulated in Aramaic and possibly Hebrew, most surviving complete versions were preserved in Guizi, the ancient language of Ethiopia. As Rabbinic Judaism consolidated its canon, Enoch was not included. Second, its angelology was detailed and speculative. As mainstream theology developed, there was caution about texts that described complex hierarchies of angels and expanded narratives not clearly rooted in the Torah. Third, The book's explanation for evil placed significant responsibility on angelic rebellion. While this view was influential, later Jewish interpretation focused more strongly on human accountability. The Enochic explanation did not disappear, but it was not emphasized. By the 4th century, when Christian leaders were formalizing the New Testament canon, the Book of Enoch was no longer widely circulated in the Greek and Latin-speaking world. It remained authoritative only within the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, where it is still part of a biblical canon today. Its removal from most Bibles was not the result of a secret meeting or sudden censorship. It was a gradual process shaped by language, usage, and theological priorities. Still, the questions it raises have never completely gone away. Where does destructive knowledge come from? Are all forms of progress neutral? What happens when boundaries meant to protect human life are ignored? The Book of Enoch does not present simple answers, but it does present a consistent warning. Power without alignment to divine order leads to instability. Today, interest in Enoch has grown again. Modern readers are drawn to its detailed descriptions of angels, its apocalyptic visions, and its bold explanations of the flood narrative. Some approach it as lost scripture. Others read it as historical literature from a formative period of Jewish thought. From an academic perspective, it remains one of the most important non-canonical Jewish texts ever discovered. It helps scholars understand how ancient communities interpreted Genesis, how ideas about fallen angels developed, and how early Christians inherited those ideas, whether one accepts its theology or not. The Book of Enoch provides a window into how ancient people wrestled with the presence of evil and the misuse of knowledge. And perhaps that is why it still resonates, because the tension it describes is not limited to the ancient world. Human history continues to show that knowledge can build or destroy. Technology can protect or harm. Information can guide or corrupt. The story of the Watchers, the giants, and forbidden knowledge is not only about the distant past. It is a reflection on responsibility. The Book of Enoch was removed from most biblical canons, but it was not erased from history. Its influence remains visible in theology, literature, and modern discussions about angels and the supernatural. Now, the question is not simply why it was removed. The real question is what we learn from it. If you found this exploration helpful, consider subscribing to the channel. In our next documentary, we will examine another ancient text that shaped early religious thought, but did not make it into most Bibles. Leave a comment with your perspective. Do you think the Book of Enoch should be treated as scripture, historical literature, or something in between? And if you want deeper, research-based breakdowns of biblical history and ancient writings, stay with us. There is much more to uncover.